After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who is to be born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." Whether kings or wise men or astrologers, these Magi were most certainly very powerful, wealthy, and influential men. So what was it that caused these men to make such an incredible journey? A journey that would have taken them over 2 years just to reach their destination. A journey that would certainly have been fraught with danger and fear. A journey that even they didn't know exactly where it would lead them. And what about their wives and their families? Were they married? Did they have children? Did they just pick up and leave on this 2-year journey and leave their families to fend for themselves? And what about their commitment to their own people, their own nation? They were most certainly very important leaders in some capacity. Could they simply just set aside all of their responsibilities for 2 whole years, not knowing if they would even find what they're looking for? How could they just pack up and go? And more importantly, why? What was their purpose? We know the end of the story, but they didn't. Why would they go to such an incredible length just to worship a baby? A baby born to be the leader of a religion that wasn't even their own. And at that time, a fairly insignificant religion at that. Where did they even get this crazy notion to begin with? Who told them that a star would appear in the eastern sky, and when it did, it would signify the birth of a baby who would be the Messiah? But even that, a Messiah for who? Not them. The Messiah would be for the Jews. So why did they even care? And yet they went, trusting solely in the guidance of a single star. Daniel and his friends were no ordinary boys. Yes, they liked to do the things that all boys seem to like to do, but there was something special about them. They seemed to be good at just about everything they tried. They were strong and good-looking, but they were also very clever. They loved to learn and were quick to understand, and what's more, they were royalty, or at least nobility. What more could they ask for? They were strong, wealthy, and wise, and they seemed to have the favor of all. And no doubt one day they would become leaders in their own right. Little did they know just how quickly their entire world was about to crumble all around them. It was a very hot and sunny day in Jerusalem when the siege began. Daniel and his family, as well as the whole city, were caught completely by surprise. Who could have known that the wrath and the fury of the Babylonians could be so quick and decisive? Before he had time to think, Daniel had been captured and taken to the land of his enemies. However, unlike many of the rest of his countrymen, he was not put under the yoke of slavery, or at least not under the yoke of hard labor. No, Daniel and his friends were taken to the king's palace. They were trained in the ways of the Babylonians and fed the finest foods. And before long, they entered into the service of the king as one of his advisors. Not a bad assignment if you're going to be in captivity. However, the comfort of his assignment rested entirely in the hands of an emotionally unsettled and unpredictable king. For Daniel, nothing could be taken for granted. Although he didn't know it at the time, God, his God, was the real one behind the siege, behind Israel's captivity, and even behind his assignment to the king's court. God had plans for Daniel that would not fully be realized for hundreds of years to come. However, his simple obedience to the leading of the Lord opened the door for Daniel and his friends to literally shape the future of their nation. The call came without warning, and one morning Daniel and his friends found themselves staring down the business end of a sword, accompanied by a warrant for their death. "What is this all about?" he asked. and the story was relayed. In the night, the king had had a very disturbing dream, which he was desperate to have interpreted. And so all the magicians, the enchanters, the diviners, the sorcerers, and the astrologers, all the wise men of Babylon, were called in to bring the interpretation. Remarkably, though, the king asked them to do the unthinkable. How were they expected to tell him what his dream was, as well as its interpretation? "It's impossible," they cried. "No king has ever asked this of his wise men." Furious at their response, the king ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. But Daniel knew his God, and he knew that nothing was impossible for his God. So he asked for some time to inquire of the Lord, and the next day he went before the king with his response. God had revealed to Daniel not only the interpretation of the dream, but the actual dream itself. King Nebuchadnezzar was dumbfounded, and he fell prostrate on the floor before Daniel and proclaimed, "Surely your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries." And then he made Daniel ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Now here's where things get interesting. Did you notice what Nebuchadnezzar did? First, he made Daniel ruler over the entire province of Babylon. That's incredible. But did you notice what else he did? He put Daniel in charge of all the wise men of Babylon. Now, these men would have included all the magicians, the enchanters, the diviners, the sorcerers, and the astrologers. These were the spiritual leaders of that nation. And now Daniel was their leader. And believe me, he had their attention. He had literally just saved their lives from certain execution. And through a single word of knowledge and the interpretation of a dream, Daniel had shown them a God who was far greater than their tricks and pagan magic, and a God who could deliver his people from death. What must they have thought? First of all, he had literally saved their lives. They were at the mercy of a demonized king who had called for their heads to roll, and Daniel did what none of them were able to do, what they all assumed was impossible. Had it been a competition, they probably would have hated and despised him. But he had literally just saved their lives. These were men whose sole responsibility was to interact with the spiritual world and bring the wisdom of the gods to the king and the people of the land. And now they were seeing a power that they had never seen before. No doubt, Daniel must have had a very eager and captive audience as he shared the stories of his people and of his God. Sadly, there is no record of all the things he shared with his new disciples, so we can only guess at what he must have told them. But surely he must have read them Isaiah and Micah's prophecies about a baby that would be born in Bethelehem that would one day rule Israel. Or what about Balaam's prophecy? "I see him, but not right now. I perceive him, but not right here. A star rises from Jacob." Surely he must have. But whatever he shared, we can only conclude that it must have been so captivating, so compelling, that his words, indeed his very own prophecies, were passed down through the generations until one clear night, several hundred years later, the great-great-great-great-great-grandsons of these wise men looked into the night sky, and they saw it. There it was, the star that Daniel had prophesied, the star that generations upon generations of their people had waited for and watched for. Could it be true? Could this be the star that would lead them to the one who would show them the way, just as he had done generations earlier to their forefathers through Daniel? Would this star lead them to the Messiah that Daniel had told them about? The one who would deliver his people, Israel, just as he had delivered their forefathers from certain death? It must be. Let us go and see and worship him, said these wise men. It seems that Israel was not the only nation anxiously awaiting the coming of the Messiah. I want to bless you this Christmas to enjoy the wonder of Jesus' birth and of God's incredible plan of redemption that has literally been playing out for thousands and thousands of years with unbelievable prophetic accuracy. I didn't actually know it when I sat down to record this story on the evening of the 21st of December, that the exact same star that the wise men saw was appearing once again in the night sky above me for the first time in over 800 years. I want to pray that the reappearance of this star in our day might also compel many others to search for Jesus with that same reckless abandon that led the wise men to him nearly 2,000 years ago. They found him and they worshiped him. I want to bless you this Christmas season to find Jesus afresh and worship him. Merry Christmas.